Hello and welcome to the In the Money Players podcast. This is our show for Tuesday, October 11th. I'm your host, Peter Thomas Fornital, back with you, not in the Brooklyn bunker, but in the area we're going to call the London Lair up here in Tottenham, not too far. You can basically throw a rock from here to where the Giants had their big upset victory on Sunday. I was in attendance. That was pretty fun. Let's not talk about any other sports that happened over the weekend as a New York sports fan. We don't need to do that. But the one of the main sporting events of the weekend, as far as I'm concerned, our guest today, our first of three guests, participated in. We're going to introduce her. We're going to talk about that. And then we're going to get to the 10 horses that we're the most looking forward to running at this year's Breeders' Cup. We bring her in now. She's back home. She might be a little sore, but she looks none the worse for wear from running the marathon this weekend. She is Jessica Paquette. Jessica, how are things?
Things are great. I had a great weekend in Chicago. What a cool city. And the coolest thing about being a racetracker and working in racing is wherever you go, you have friends. I went to Hawthorne, saw Hawthorne Gym, and Larry Ravelli took me out for deep dish pizza to carb load before the marathon. And it was everything I wanted it to be.
And the marathon experience, it was your first one. You looked fantastic doing it. How did it feel?
It was magnificent. I'm never going to break any speed records, but to come back a year and a week from breaking my back and to feel pretty good throughout the marathon. I mean, like, no one feels good running 26 miles, but it was wonderful.
That's so cool. I love it. Well, we'll talk about some other inspiring athletes of the equine variety coming up right now. So the gimmick of this show, I'm stealing from, oh my gosh, it's a well-worn trope on YouTube. And I know this because my daughter watches these videos all the time. You know, it's like the top 10 Nickelodeon theme songs or the top 10 moments in Disney Channel history or whatever it happens to be. We're going to do the top 10 horses we're most looking forward to at this year's Breeders' Cup. We're going to kick off with you, Jessica. Who's your number 5?
My number 5 is Red Knight. I know I'm a little bit of a homer, and he had such an impressive win at Colonial Downs, coming in off of a big layoff. I got in some arguments with some folks on the Twitter about it, but I thought it was a textbook perfect ride from Horatio Karamanos, and I will die on that hill. But
you love him on the turf, don't you?
Love him on the turf. But Red Knight, it just keeps getting better. I think sharper and sharper coming in off of the bench. His win at Kentucky Downs was very impressive. Like he is kind of up against it. These waters are a little deep, but he deserves a shot against the big boys.
I hear and big girl in the case
and
of this
big girl, yeah.
Right? I mean, Warlike Goddess is going to take a big piece of the market. It's hard to evaluate this race in any full detail without knowing which of these Europeans are going to come over. But from this far out, this is a horse that's not on a lot of people's radar. If you can bet internationally, you're looking at about 25-1. Would you be happy with that?
I would be thrilled with that. I don't know if he's quite good enough to win, but I think he's good enough to at least ruin your exotics.
Let's talk about another warrior type horse. My number 5 on this countdown list of last year's champion from the Breeders' Cup, filly and mare sprint, who looked pretty good recently. Cece back in action, and I love the pattern. It looks a lot like what we saw from her going into last year's event. You know, there were a lot of people who thought Gamine couldn't lose. She did not have her best day at the Breeders' Cup. Cece got the money. I think there's a chance she could do it. Once again in this spot. Is she on your radar at all for that race?
So filly sprinters are probably the division that just excites me the least for whatever reason. But Cece is a hard-knocking, honest mare. Easy to root for her.
Yeah, and what a great story it would be. I mean, there's a few horses in here. One in particular that we'll get to later. That they could make movies about. I feel like Cece isn't too far out of that category at this point for her longevity and some of the efforts she's put in. Let's move on to our 4th pick in the countdown as we move things along. I'll dive in and do mine first here. I really like this colt, Loggins, and it's not just for the musical hunch play. You know, I'm not going to start singing Danger Zone. Don't worry. But
please do. If he wins, you have to. Okay,
I will give you that. If we can cash on Loggins on at the Breeders' Cup, I will do my best. Kenny Loggins. I asked Brad Cox if in fact he was named for the singer, and he just punted that question to the moon, and he took the fifth. So I don't know, but there's not that many Loggins. You got to figure. But this horse was so good the other day, so game. You know, knocked around a bit down the line. I wouldn't have been surprised if he'd been put up after all the argy-bargy in the lane. But the real reason I like him is not so much the trip and the stretch, but the pace dynamics. I mean, this was a race where the other speed finishes nowhere, and the winner gets a perfect trip. Forte, who's a very good horse. I mean, you got Group One, Grade One form. So when I sit here, sometimes I get the names wrong. The other day I had to stop myself when I almost called it an NFL match. Anyway, forgive the Group One bit, but yeah, Grade One winner in Forte. But Loggins, to me, this is a horse that I think the best is yet to come. I think Cave Rock is going to come in here to the juvenile very, very dressed up. I mean, serious contender, but I don't know. The vibes I'm getting, I'm very interested in seeing what Loggins is going to do at the Breeders' Cup. Who do you want to nominate as your number 4 selection here?
I'm going to go with Epicenter here. I think that this is a horse who's just a little bit overlooked. The conversation in the Classic is all Flightline versus Life is Good. And Epicenter has kind of passed every test with flying colors. I think he's come into his own in the way these Steve Asmussen horses really do the second half of the year. His good ones get better in the fall. I think there are very few trainers that can have a horse hold their condition throughout their 3-year-old year and help them mature and develop like he does. And Epicenter's coming into this race really, really good.
I think it's becoming a specialty of Asmussen, actually, to get not just to get him good, but to keep him good over an extended
period. And that's
period.
harder. I mean, I feel like that is harder. It's easy, not easy, or anyone could do it, but to get them to peak and to have that one big performance and then never be heard from again, or then see their form really take a nosedive. That happens quite a bit, and his horses they're able to withstand some pretty solid campaigns.
We'll talk about the Classic a little bit more in the show. I'll tip my hand maybe with that statement as to who a horse I'll be talking about later is. Meanwhile, let's go to our 3rd picks in this countdown, and we'll keep it with you, Jessica.
G. Lori is probably one of my strongest opinions on the card, should she go. I loved her maiden win at Colonial Downs. It was the single most impressive 2-year-old performance I saw in person all summer. The turn of foot this filly showed was remarkable. And in the Talma, she really had everything go against her. I thought she ran very professionally despite all of that. And it looks like the kind of race where a horse gets something out of it. I also thought in her maiden win, she was a little bit green. She was spooky. She was looky coming back into the winner's circle. The steeplechase hurdles were still set up on the other side of the turf course. And she was like,
what is that monster?
Yeah. So this is a horse that still hasn't kind of really been there, done that yet. And I think she's just going to get better with a little bit of a gut check.
Interesting. I mean, I was a big fan of her going into the last race. Did you have a specific excuse?
I just think she didn't really have the best trip. I mean, I thought everything kind of went against her. All things considered, I thought she ran okay enough to warrant that next step.
We'll move on with my 3rd pick, who is Highfield Princess, who's a horse that I think many people in Europe would have been calling the likely favorite for the turf sprint based on the amazing story this year coming out of, some very average looking races on the all-weather, and now a 3-time Group 1 winner. See, I said it correctly there. 3-time Group 1 winner sprinting. But I feel like with what Golden Pal did the other day, and as good as he's been in Kentucky, the market's going to tilt in his direction. And Highfield Princess, who's just an amazing rags to riches story in her own right, has a chance to actually be a halfway decent price in this race. What do you think in general of this year's turf sprint? Do you think I'm am I crazy trying to beat Golden Pal?
I don't think anyone's crazy for trying. I think there may be some disappointed folks. I mean, he does have home track advantage, and this is a horse that just shows up. I mean, I've tried to beat him more times than I can count, and he proves me wrong mostly every time. I'll probably try again. He'll probably do it again, but I like where you're thinking.
Yeah, I mean, Glass Slippers, the first Euro winner of this race, this form makes hers look fairly average. And you could make the argument going in on figures and form that she was the fastest. There may be a little bit of a hidden advantage if it's not Golden Pal's day. And there's always the exacta to cover in. And I might take that approach as well. Let's move on to our 2nd picks here, Jessica, and I'll throw the ball right back in your court.
So this is an interesting one to me. Society, I thought, ran just a dynamite race in the cotillion on Pennsylvania Derby Day. We do have a tendency to maybe get a little stuck on a horse when they prove us right one time. And she did. She was my big opinion on the card. I thought the Lucas filly was a little over the top. And I had this, when you have like a really strong opinion and you're just digging your heels in on it. And it all worked out remarkably exactly how I thought it would. So Society has a soft spot in my heart for that alone. But I think this is the case of this sort of Asmussen horse getting good this second half of the year. To me, she reminded me a lot of Clairiere, who certainly doesn't embarrass herself and turned out to have a really solid 4-year-old season as well. And I think Society, best is still to come for her. Though that said, like facing Malathaat and Nest, I mean, good luck. But
I love her pattern of development. The last 2 races have been so huge. If I had one quibble, I do think, and you were there watching much closer than me, but I do think that racetrack and the way it was playing may have flattered her just a little bit coming to this test. But at the same time, if she's going to be some big price, and people aren't going to be taking the form literally anyway because they're falling over themselves to bet Nest and my next horse, who we'll talk about in a second, I definitely think you can, get some value here potentially just the same. Is that a concern of yours at all, as somebody who was there watching very closely on Pennsylvania Derby Day? Am I exaggerating the idea that she might have been flattered?
No, not at all. I think it was a brilliant ride by Flo to take advantage of a track that was playing exactly to his filly's strengths. But that said, she still had to do the heavy lifting and do the work, and she finished so strongly and so well. I'm willing to give her a little bit of a chance here. But again, the 2 big girls look very formidable. And to me, they're kind of like a 1 and 1A together because they remind me so much of each other. Nest is like a little Malathaat who might be better, but maybe not. Malathaat's last race was, I think, her most impressive yet.
I love her. And that, talking about a good ride on Malathaat, he did a fantastic job, did John Velasquez. I think that the market, looking at international markets, is so ready to crown Nest the best. And I'm just not sure that that's the right thing for this market to do. I think, at the very least, they should be 1 and 1A. But if anything, I would still make Malathaat the one that I would be more interested in. The tremendous affinity for the Keeneland surface. And maybe theoretically slower coming out of the last race, but that's not taking into account the slow pace and everything that was going on there. And then you just throw in the fact, and I'll trust your opinion on this much more than mine as somebody who actually rides horses and just has more, institutional knowledge about what good looking workouts are. But, Malathaat and Nest work together, and generally the works I've seen, I've always thought Malathaat was going a little bit the better, or maybe not always, but more often than not going the better of the 2. I think Malathaat could be another one of these runners who's actually underrated. And I feel like she's the one that, is wearing the belt in this relationship,
So here's a wacky theory that I kind of apply to handicapping or thinking about fillies and mares racing. There are, I think, some female horses, they are mares from the moment they hit the ground. Like they're just the big bodied, they have an attitude. It's sort of an intangible thing. And then there are some horses that no matter how old they get, they always kind of look like a filly to me. They always look a little young, a little girlish, a little immature. Malathaat is a mare. She has sort of a boss mare attitude. I was at the one of her races at Saratoga last summer, and she walked into the paddock, and those are the kind of horses that have a different air to them. For me, like we're going to use Rachel Alexander and Zenyatta for an example. Rachel, always a filly. There was always something a little feminine about her and a little light, and take nothing away from an amazing career. Zenyatta was a mare.
As tough as they come, gigantic, and just incredible.
There's like physicality to some of them. In my mind, like Beholder was a mare when she was 3.
Yeah. I mean, I've never heard that articulated like that.
This is kind of like my little deranged horse person brain going.
I love it. I absolutely love it. All right. Before we do our number ones, we're going to do our honorable mentions. This is something else I'm stealing from Perrin's Disney and Nickelodeon videos. They make you wait.
Paying her for this.
Oh, believe me, she'll be well compensated in Squishmallows, if you know what those are. But anyway, we'll do the honorable mentions. And then I talked before about the idea of the horse that would make a movie. I think of all the horses at the Breeders' Cup this year that would make a movie, your honorable mention would make the best movie. Do you have some sympathy for that point of view?
Tyler's Tribe, to me, is an example that great horses can come from anywhere. And this horse really hammers home the importance of state-bred breeding programs in these smaller markets. They're important to the agricultural economy. They're important to the health of the sport. And everyone deserves a chance on the big day. And I admire them taking a swing. You have to root for this horse if you're a fan of horse racing, a fan of the underdog. And he deserves a chance off of how impressive he's been.
And how about the rider? I mean, I think that's an incredible
Cool.
story that the public is gonna get to. A female rider, a 20-year-old apprentice. I mean, that's not something you see every day at the Breeders' Cup.
I hope she has ice in her veins because I'm sure, when that crowd starts cheering when they walk onto the track, that is going to be a moment.
It's definitely gonna be exciting. I was guessing that you would have made this your number one pick, knowing your affinity for state bred breeding programs and the underdog in general.
I am a sucker for them. But no, I do have a one truly strong opinion. If I'm wagering, it's going to be a single later in the card. Are we getting into it, or do you have your?
I've got my honorable mention.
Okay.
I do want to officially name check Kylie Jordan as well. My honorable mention other runner is going to be Platinum Queen in the Juvenile Turf Sprint. But before I talk about her for a minute, with Tyler's Tribe, still uncertain which race he's going to be going in. Which one would you prefer? Would you prefer to see him in the Juvenile, or do you think the Juvenile Turf Sprint might make more sense?
So that's such a tough question. And the trainer, he knows his horse better than anybody. And there's a pro and a con to either. You go in the juvenile, you're going to have a couple of, Bob Baffert buzzsaws to run up against, and some really formidable horses from some of the top barns in the country. The juvenile turf sprint does lend itself to be a little bit more wide open. However, he's unproven on the turf, so we'll see what he thinks of it if he gets to work him over it. But you just have to trust that. And I think you do see this in a smaller barn. They know their horses so well because they're the one. They don't have 70 horses in their shed row.
Should he go in the Juvenile Turf Sprint, gonna have to face the Platinum Queen, who's already a Group 1 winner against Older from the race at Longchamp the other day. I'm excited to just see what she does. Now, we've seen this before where we've had 2-year-olds who have form against Older coming into this race, and then they haven't necessarily performed that well. I think the Platinum Queen could be the exception, though. In any case, I love the international storyline, and I'm very excited to see how she does. She didn't quite crack my top 5, but I'm glad to get to name check her. Let's move on to our top picks, Jessica, and we'll start with you.
So Modern Games will try to officially win a Breeders' Cup race this year.
Don't rub it in, huh? Bad memories.
That was I benefited from that. I had tis the law kind of every which way. So that was one of those rare instances where I'd rather be lucky than good. But Modern Games has certainly proved that race was not a fluke performance. He is as brilliant a runner as you'll come. And in Charlie Appleby, we trust. His win at Woodbine was one of the single most impressive races I think I've seen all year.
Yeah, incredible. And it came back so well on speed figures. There's talk that he may run at Champions Day, which, I have mixed feelings about. It'd be fun to see him, but I'm concerned about getting that extra race in when it seemed, I don't like audibles. It seemed like the plan all along had just been to go Breeders' Cup. Would that bother you at all if he does happen to run this weekend?
Charlie Appleby will forget more about horses than I will ever know in my entire life. So if he thinks the horse is ready for a race, needs a race, can handle some more globe trotting, cool, fine. He'll still be my single should he be in the Breeders' Cup starting gate.
Good stuff. My number one pick, this would probably be the consensus number one pick to this question of people. I can't wait to see what Flightline does. I mean, what a story this is going to be. Is he really going to be able to back up that performance from the last day and justify some of the historic comparisons that have been made about him? Look, in terms of betting, I think it's very likely he will be a focal point for me. But in terms of who I'm most wanting to see run, he's number one with a bullet for me. I mean, I think this has the potential. I mean, one way or the other, just from a story point of view, this is the race I'm going to be on pins and needles, getting ready to watch. Now, obviously, knowing some of the horses that you're thinking about betting, you don't think he's as invincible as I do, maybe? Is that fair to say?
No horse is invincible. That's why we run the races. As a racing fan, I'm excited to see what he's made of. I'm excited to get a chance to see him in person. And maybe he does have another otherworldly performance. And we all go, where were you when Flightline won the Breeders' Cup Classic in 2022? Maybe. I'm also a little bit of a Grinch for these horses with these abbreviated campaigns. For me, that's not what excites me as a racing fan. I would rather have a mid-level claimer run every couple of weeks that I can become a true fan of. But He is brilliant. He may be a once in a lifetime kind of horse, and we'll see in the Breeders' Cup.
It's going to be fun. It's going to be a great weekend. We're going to have you, Jessica, as part of our coverage leading up to it. And I should have said this before, but if you're listening to this version, this is going to be a YouTube special that we do. We're going to have plenty of extra YouTube content. We encourage people to rate, review, and subscribe on YouTube. And if you want more content, we're going to have, this very show is going to continue in its audio form. If you're a YouTube person who also listens to podcasts, make sure to check us out wherever you get your podcasts in the Money Media. We appreciate it. We appreciate you, Jessica, and we'll talk to you soon.
Thank you.
Just me.